Usually when we pick a topic for a deep dive, we're looking at a single lane. You have your great writer lane or your revolutionary lane or your misunderstood scientist lane.
Right. Most people, even the geniuses, they tend to pick a lane and they stay in it. That's how you get good at something. You specialize.
Exactly. But today,
Mm-hmm.
today we are looking at a life that didn't just switch lanes. It drove across the entire highway, crashed through the median, and somehow kept going.
He really did.
We're talking about a man who, by the time he was 29 years old, had been a cub reporter, a published crime novelist, an aeronautical publisher, a designer of automobile gears, a poet, and, just to make the rest of us feel completely inadequate,
Right.
a Marxist philosopher who wrote a theoretical physics book that anticipated Nobel Prize-winning ideas by about 40 years.
It is frankly exhausting just listing his resume. I mean, if you put this in a movie script, the studio would send it back and say it's too unrealistic.
It really is. And then, at the absolute peak of this intellectual outflow, he's gone, killed in action at 29. Today, we are doing a deep dive into the life and mind of Christopher Caudwell.
Born Christopher St. John Sprague, Caudwell was the mask he wore for the heavy stuff, the pseudonym he adopted later.
Right. And to help us figure out how one person can be a pulp thriller writer and a quantum theorist at the same time, we've pulled from a massive stack of sources. We've got biographies, a really in-depth interview with Professor Helena Sheehan from Jacobin magazine,
A heavy physics analysis by the physicist Sean Lovejoy, and reviews of his posthumous works like The Crisis in Physics.
and I think our mission today is quite specific. We aren't just here to gawk at a prodigy.
No. We want to understand Caudwell's central argument, which is honestly quite provocative even today. He argued that the crisis in modern science, specifically in physics during the 1930s, wasn't just about the data.
It wasn't about atoms or light waves.
Exactly. It was about how society itself is organized. He basically argued that you cannot truly understand the universe if you don't understand the culture that is studying it.
Which is a bold claim. He's saying, hey, physicists, check your social bias before you check your equations.
Pretty much.
But before we get to the entropy and the philosophy and all the heavy lifting, we have to deal with this Renaissance man phase. Because the first half of his life just reads like a novel.
It really does. He was born in 1907 in Putney, London, and the first thing that jumps out is his education. Or, well, the lack of it. He went to a Benedictine school, but he dropped out at 15.
15, so no Cambridge, no Oxford. In 1920s England, that must have been a huge barrier.
Oh, massive. He was an outsider from day one, the ultimate autodidact. He leaves school and goes straight into the workforce, starts as a cub reporter at the Yorkshire Observer.
And then he pivots, which is already a weird move for a teenager.
A very weird pivot. He moves on to edit a publication called British Malaya, and then he pivots again right into aviation.
With his brother, right. They founded an aeronautical publishing company.
They did. And this is where it gets interesting. He wasn't just, pushing paper. He was technical. He understood the mechanics.
The sources mention he was actually inventing things. This wasn't just theory for him.
Yes, and this is a detail I love. He designed an infinitely variable gear for automobiles.
See, that's the detail that gets me. Usually, literary types aren't getting grease under their fingernails designing gearboxes. You have the arts people and you have the shop class people. He was both.
And that's crucial for where he ends up. He understood matter. He understood how things worked.
But wait, because while he's tinkering with variable gears, he's also churning out what can only be described as pulp fiction.
Reams of it, poems, plays, a whole stack of detective novels and thrillers.
I have the list here, and the titles are just fantastic. Fatality in Fleet Street, The Six Queer Things, and my absolute favorite, The Corpse with the Sunburnt Face.
You have to love the 1930s thriller titles. They certainly grab your attention.
It sounds like he was just paying the bills. But do you think this mix, the ghost stories, the gears, did that prepare him for the heavy philosophy later? Or was he just distracted?
No, I think it's the key to the whole story. Look, in the early 20th century, academia was becoming incredibly siloed. Physicists only spoke to physicists. Poets only spoke to poets.
The age of specialization.
Exactly. But Caudwell was an outsider to all of that. He didn't have a professor telling him, no, Christopher, that's not your department. He didn't know the rules.
So his ignorance of the academic boundaries was actually his superpower.
Precisely. It allowed him to see the big picture. He was looking for a Weltanschauung, a German term for a total worldview. He wanted one theory that explained why a gear works, why a poem moves you, and how society functions.
He wanted the grand unified theory of everything.
And that search brings us to what we're calling the turn. because around 1934, at age 27, Christopher St. John Sprigg, the thriller writer, effectively vanishes.
And Christopher Caudwell takes over.
He discovers Marxism. And typical of Caudwell, he doesn't just read a pamphlet. He studies it with what Helena Sheehan calls extraordinary intensity.
It's almost like he was looking for a framework that could hold all his different interests, and he decided this was it.
He felt he'd found the key, and the productivity spike that followed is it's hard to believe it's real. In just 2 years, from 34 to 36, he produces a massive body of theoretical work, Illusion and Reality, a theory of poetry, and the book we're focusing on, The Crisis in Physics.
And just to be clear, he wasn't sitting in a library wearing a tweed jacket, right?
Far from it. He moved to Poplar in East London, a very poor working-class area. He joined the Communist Party. He was out there fly-posting, selling the Daily Worker, and literally maddling black shirts, fascists in the streets.
So he's writing high-level theory about quantum mechanics in the morning and getting into street fights in the evening.
But for him, they were the same thing, theory and practice. You can't separate them. And that conviction that you cannot separate the thinker from the doer is actually the core of The Crisis in Physics.
Okay, let's unpack this book. Because in the 1930s, physics was in a weird place.
A very weird place. You had relativity on one side, quantum mechanics on the other, and they did not get along. Physics felt fragmented.
And Caudwell looked at this and said, the problem isn't the atoms, the problem is the scientists.
Or rather, the society that produced the scientists. He built his argument around a concept he called the subject-object dichotomy.
Okay, hold on. This is the heavy lifting part, subject-object dichotomy. Break that down for us in plain English.
Sure. So Caudwell argued that modern capitalist society creates this deep split. On one side, you have the subject, the bourgeoisie, the class that plans things, theorizes.
The people in the boardroom.
Right. And on the other side, you have the object, the working class, the people who actually handle the matter, build the bridges, turn the gears.
The thinkers versus the doers.
Exactly. And Caudwell thought this social separation infected science. He argued that scientists, coming from that thinking class, saw themselves as detached observers. They were looking at the world as if through a pane of glass.
Instead of realizing they are in the room with the experiment.
Precisely. Because they're philosophically cut off from practice, from the gritty reality of changing matter, they struggled to synthesize their discoveries. When the data got weird, like in quantum mechanics, they didn't have a philosophy grounded in reality to handle it.
So what did they do if the data didn't fit the theory?
According to Caudwell, they retreated into mysticism. You start hearing prominent physicists say things like, matter doesn't really exist, it's all just mathematical waves, or reality is all determined by the observer's mind.
So they threw their hands up and said, it's magic.
In a way, yes. Caudwell saw this as a cop-out. He believed that because they couldn't connect their theory to social practice, their worldview shattered into these dualisms, mind versus matter, freedom versus necessity. He's basically psychoanalyzing the entire field of physics.
You cannot have a unified science in a fragmented society. That's the core takeaway.
Correct.
Now, if this was just abstract philosophy, it would be interesting enough. But he actually applied this to hard science. He took on the second law of thermodynamics.
This is my favorite part, especially the analysis by the physicist Sean Lovejoy. It shows Caudwell wasn't just, throwing words around. He had a deep intuition for physics.
So the second law, entropy. The standard explanation I learned in school is that everything tends toward disorder. The universe is running down.
Right. Eventually we hit heat death, where everything is just a lukewarm soup of nothingness. Maximum disorder.
That was the standard interpretation.
That was, and largely still is, the standard interpretation. It's a very pessimistic view. The universe is a machine slowly running out of battery.
But Caudwell didn't buy it.
No. He looked at the second law and he didn't see death. He saw evolution. He argued that the second law is actually a law of becoming.
Becoming. That sounds much more optimistic. How do you get optimism?
He said that order and disorder are created simultaneously. You can't have one without the other.
There was a great analogy in the source material about a room. I think this really helps visualize it.
Yes, Caudwell wrote, every increase in complexity makes possible an increase in disorder. A well-furnished room can be more untidy than a monastery cell.
I love that. A monk cell is simple. It has a bed, a chair. It's hard to make it messy because there's nothing there. The entropy potential is low.
Exactly. But a well-furnished living room with books, cushions, rugs, you can make a huge mess there. But that disorder is proof of the room's complexity.
So the disorder is a byproduct of the system getting more complex.
Exactly. Caudwell saw the universe not as a machine winding down, but as a dynamic process where newness emerges. He argued that we're seeing matter organize into higher and higher forms, atoms to molecules, molecules to life, life to consciousness.
And here's the kicker. He wasn't just being poetic. He was actually anticipating future science, wasn't he?
He really was. Sean Lovejoy points out that Caudwell anticipated the work of Ilya Prigogine.
Who won a Nobel Prize for this? Much, much later.
Decades later, yeah. Prigogine won for his work on dissipative structures. The idea is that systems that are far from equilibrium, like living things, can create order by expelling entropy into their environment.
So life is basically an island of order that pumps chaos out into the sea around it.
That's a great way to put it. Caudwell didn't have the math for this yet. The equations didn't exist in his time. But he had the intuition. He saw that the arrow of time wasn't just a slide into death, but a path toward complexity.
It is wild to think that a guy who wrote The Corpse with a Sunburnt Face was also figuring out non-equilibrium thermodynamics in his spare time.
It speaks to that outsider perspective again. He wasn't bogged down by the standard dogma of heat death. He was looking for a philosophy that explained life, growth, and revolution, and he found it in entropy.
But sadly, he didn't get to see these ideas vindicated. And this brings us to the final tragic chapter of his life.
The Spanish Civil War.
It's 1936. Fascism is on the rise. Franco is attacking the Spanish Republic. Caudwell is 29. He's just written these massive theoretical works. He could have stayed in London, right? He could have just been the intellectual voice.
He could have, but remember his philosophy. Theory and practice are one. If he stayed behind, he would have been doing exactly what he criticized the physicists for, being a detached observer.
So he had to go.
He had to. In December 1936, he drives an ambulance to Spain to join the international brigades.
And he didn't stay in the ambulance for long.
No, he transferred to a machine gun unit. And very quickly, he found himself at the Battle of Jarama.
Which was a meat grinder.
It was brutal. On February 12, 1937, his first day of actual battle, Caudwell was commanding a machine gun section.
And the details of his death are just, they feel like something out of a heroic epic.
The British battalion was being overrun. They were taking heavy fire and had to retreat. Caudwell stayed behind at his machine gun post to cover the retreat of his comrades. He was killed there.
Died saving his friends.
He did. And the tragedy is compounded by the fact that his major works, Illusion and Reality, The Crisis in Physics, were not even published yet.
They were just stacks of paper back in London. The world didn't know what it was losing. There's that heartbreaking detail about his brother, isn't there?
Yes, his brother, Theodore. He actually tried to get the Communist Party leadership to recall Caudwell from Spain. He went to the party's secretary, Harry Pollitt, and showed him the proofs of Illusion and Reality.
Basically saying, read this. This man is a genius. You can't let him die in a trench.
He's too valuable to lose. But it was too late. By the time they realized what they had, he was already gone.
It really makes you wonder what he would have achieved if he'd lived. If he did all this by 29, imagine him at 50.
It's one of the great what-ifs of intellectual history. J.B.S. Haldane, a famous scientist of that era, he called Caudwell's work a quarry of ideas for future philosophers.
A quarry. That's an interesting word choice. Not a gold mine, but a quarry.
Right. A quarry is something you dig into, you pull stone from, you build with. It implies there's this massive amount of raw material there that we still haven't fully used.
And E.P. Thompson, the great historian, described him as an extraordinary shooting star crossing England's empirical night.
It's a beautiful line. It captures that flash of brilliance against the dark backdrop of the 1930s.
But let's bring this back to the present. Why should we care? Why does a 29-year-old writer from the 1930s matter to us now?
Well, Helena Sheehan really emphasizes this. Caudwell's importance wasn't just his specific theories, but his attempt to heal the fragmentation of knowledge. He was striving for a worldview that integrated everything: art, science, life, politics.
He wanted to put the world back together.
He did. He believed science wasn't a cold, detached collection of facts, but a warm, living social activity.
It brings us back to that provocative thought we hinted at in the beginning. Caudwell died in 1937, warning about specialization.
And if you look at us today, we live in an age of hyper-specialization. We have more data than ever before. We have experts for every tiny subfield of subfield. But do we have the synthesis?
We have all the pieces, but do we have the picture on the box?
Right. Caudwell argued that we can't truly understand nature if we view ourselves as separate from it, as just detached observers scrolling through data.
So the question he leaves us with is, are we becoming even more fragmented than the dying culture he critiqued almost 100 years ago? Are we just collecting facts without the philosophy to connect them?
It's a question worth asking. Maybe we need a little less specialization and a little more of that Renaissance man spirit.
A little more gear designing, ghost story writing, physics theorizing energy.
Couldn't hurt.
That's all for this deep dive into Christopher Caudwell. Thanks for listening.